I'm going to commit the cardinal sin of booktube. I'm going to talk about a book I haven't read. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a video in which I'm going to talk about the book that is destroying the United States of America right now, and that book is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. As I said in the introduction, I've not read Atlas Shrugged, and I have no intention of reading Atlas Shrugged, which may mean that you think that I have no business making this video or talking about the book. Well, in my defense, I'm not really going to be talking so much about the book as I'm going to be talking about the ideas that are encapsulated in the book, and those ideas I'm going to get from the words of Ayn Rand herself. So real quickly, Atlas Shrugged is this humongous book which basically involves a young woman who inherits a railroad company and who wants to make her trains, her new railroad, out of this special metal that was invented by this guy. And the government, because the government is made up, is really powerful and exercises a lot of regulations, prevents her from making this train out of this material. Now she falls in love with this guy and there's a love story involved there, but eventually, you know, she's going to lose out on her railroad and on her dreams for a railroad, and she's going to go off looking for these kind of lost entrepreneurs and industrialists, and she's going to find them. And she's going to find in particular, you know, a guy named John Galt, who is, you know, a brilliant businessman who essentially has given up on the country because of all the regulations and all the socialism he sees, and he's gone off to live, you know, in a valley with other billionaire industrialists where they have their own society, and it's all perfect and utopian in every kind of way. But she's going to convince him, I think, to come back to the country and to try to set things right. He's going to do that. He gives a really long speech about what should be done, and the government just kind of ignores him anyway, and he goes away again. I think that's essentially the plot of Atlas Shrugged, but, you know, feel free to correct me on some of those bigger points, if they matter, in the comment section down below. Now, Atlas Shrugged, along with The Fountainhead, are probably Ayn Rand's two most famous works, and I think they're easily her most influential works. To give you some idea, in 2018, the United States, or PBS, conducted this thing called the Great American Read, in which they asked Americans, you know, what their favorite books were, what they thought the most important books were, and Atlas Shrugged actually ranked as number 20 on that list. That's a pretty high ranking for a book that's that long and was written back in the 1950s. And the truth of the matter is, Atlas Shrugged has had a tremendous amount of influence in American politics ever since then. It doesn't fit perfectly within any government philosophy that exists today, but it definitely influenced the emergence of modern American libertarianism, even though there's a break between the followers of Rand and her philosophy and libertarians. It's definitely influenced the modern day conservative party or Republican Party here in the United States, and its increasing belief in, you know, deregulation and lower taxes and all those kind of things. It's definitely had a tremendous kind of outsized impact on the United States, on politics in the United States, and I think on what we see going on right now in the United States government, which I see as the destruction of the United States of America and the United States government. So what I found here, what we're really going to look at, and what I'm going to pay most attention to, is an interview that Ayn Rand did with Mike Wallace back in the late 50s, early 60s, somewhere around there, in which she laid out basically her philosophy, and the philosophy that is espoused and depicted in her novel, Atlas Shrugged. So I'm going to watch some of these clips. I'll put them over here, and the sound will be there, but I'm going to be watching them here so that I can remember, you know, what she says and react to those things. Now, one thing you need to know is that to try to condense what I think are the essence of what Rand says here into, you know, clips that, you know, you're going to have the patience to watch, I sped up the video of her talking to 1.5 speed. So it's going a little faster. So if you watch my videos on 1.5, she's going to be going about 3. You might want to slow down. Also to note, I did edit these clips. This is not exactly how it appears. I'll try to remember to leave links to where I got this information or got these clips down below in the show notes. You can watch the whole thing in their entirety if you want to. I clipped it together to try to avoid repetition and discussion of things I didn't think were necessarily topical. Anyway, here we go.
Here in the United States, perhaps the most challenging and unusual new philosophy has been forged by a novelist, Ayn Rand. Miss Rand's point of view is still comparatively unknown in America, but if it ever did take hold, it would revolutionize our lives. Ayn, to begin with, I wonder if I can ask you to capsulize. I know this is difficult. Can I ask you to capsulize your philosophy?
I call it objectivism,
All right.
meaning a philosophy based on objective reality. Now, let me explain it as briefly as I can. First, my philosophy is based on the concept that reality exists as an objective absolute, that man's mind, reason, is his means of perceiving it, and that man needs a rational morality. I am primarily the creator of a new code of morality which has so far been believed impossible, namely a morality not based on faith, not on faith, not on arbitrary whim, not on emotion, not on arbitrary edict, mystical or social, but on reason, a morality which can be proved by means of logic, which can be demonstrated to be true and necessary. My morality is based on man's life as a standard of value, and since man's mind is his basic means of survival, I hold that if man wants to live on earth and to live as a human being, he has to hold reason as an absolute, that his highest moral purpose is the achievement of his own happiness, and that he must not force other people, nor accept their right to force him, that each man must live as an end in himself and follow his own rational self-interest.
You put this philosophy to work in your novel Atlas Shrugged.
That's right.
You demonstrate it in human terms in your novel Atlas Shrugged. And let me start by quoting from a review of this novel Atlas Shrugged that appeared in Newsweek. It said that you are out to destroy almost every edifice in the contemporary American way of life, our Judeo-Christian religion, our modified government-regulated capitalism, our rule by the majority will. Other reviews have said that you scorn churches and the concept of God. Are these accurate criticisms?
Yes. I am challenging the base of all these institutions. I'm challenging the moral code of altruism, the precept that man's moral duty is to live for others, that man must sacrifice himself to others, which is the present-day morality.
You say that you do not like the altruism by which we live. You like a certain kind of Ayn Randist selfishness.
I would say that I don't like is too weak a word. I consider it evil. And self-sacrifice is the precept that man needs to serve others in order to justify his existence, that his moral duty is to serve others. That is what most people believe today.
Well, yes, we're taught to feel concern for our fellow man, to feel responsible for his welfare.
I say that man is entitled to his own happiness and that he must achieve it himself.
Okay, so in that clip, you kind of basically see her lay out the idea of objectivism. And to say that basically everybody's moral duty is to live for their own self-interest and to not, worry about others, to not sacrifice themselves, how she likes to say it, for others. She views altruism as evil. In other words, as the clip in which he read the quote from the New York Times about her book and what she was espousing is right. She wants to destroy a lot of things that are at the heart of American society and at the heart of what Americans believe. And this idea that the selfishness, the self-interest of people is what they should be working to achieve is really, I think, at the heart of what we see in today's modern conservative movement, which, I'll talk about later. But also you notice here, and this is one of the places where I'm going to defend Rand just a little bit, notice here that she is absolutely opposed to Christian morality. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that she lived long enough to see some of this happening. One of the things that she opposed was the combining of this kind of, or the attempt to combine this kind of self-interest with Christian theology, as Reagan did by, bringing in Southern conservatives, Southern Christian conservatives into the Republican Party, along with this kind of philosophy, which I'm going to tie back to Ayn Rand in a minute. So this is then the second clip of Rand.
Now, one of the principal achievements of this country in the past 20 years particularly, I think most people agree, is the gradual growth of social protective legislation based on the principle that we are our brother's keepers. How do you feel about the political trends of the United States, the Western world?
The way everybody feels, except more consciously. I feel that it is terrible, that you see destruction all around you, and that you are moving toward disaster until and unless all those welfare state conceptions have been reversed and rejected. It is precisely these trends which are bringing the world to disaster, because we are now moving towards complete collectivism or socialism, a system under which everybody is enslaved to everybody.
And you believe that there should be no right by the government to tax. You believe that there should be no such thing as welfare legislation, unemployment compensation, regulation during times of stress, certain kinds of rent controls and things like that.
That's right. I'm opposed to all forms of control. I am for an absolute, laissez-faire, free, unregulated economy. If you do not regulate production and trade, you will have peaceful cooperation and harmony and justice among men.
When you advocate completely unregulated economic life in which every man works for his own profit, you are asking, in a sense, for a devil-take-the-hindmost, dog-eat-dog society, and one of the main reasons for the growth of government controls was to fight the robber barons, to fight laissez-faire, in which the very people whom you admire the most, the hard-headed industrialists, the successful men, perverted the use of their power. Is that not true?
No, it isn't.
No.
This country was made not by robber barons, but by independent men, by industrialists who succeeded on sheer ability.
And having
By
approached
ability,
as
I mean without political force, help, or compulsion.
Okay, so here you see a lot of things I think that you can identify are tied to the modern day conservative movement in the United States as, represented by the Republican Party. The opposition to taxation, the opposition to welfare programs, the advocating laissez-faire, non-regulation of the economy, the kind of promotion to heroic status of industrialists, that all those things come from Ayn Rand. And I hope you also noticed that when she said that if we didn't have regulation, that men would live peacefully with one another, I hope you also noticed something that I think is a feature of almost all philosophies. And, it doesn't necessarily make them bad or wrong or something we should discard, but they are all naive at their heart. They all require following an absolute set of principles to achieve this kind of utopian society, which, she believes to be achieved through following objectivism. And that's not possible. And the truth of the matter is that the very people who have co-opted Ayn Rand's ideas and turned them into politics are using those ideas combined with other things she didn't like to achieve exactly what she really doesn't want. She says naively, and she's a bad historian, I hate to tell you this, that this country was started by people who, essentially built businesses and industrialized without government intervention or help. Well, that's just not true. Anybody will tell you from the very beginning, we had tariffs designed to protect American manufacturers. That is the government interfering in the economy. Alexander Hamilton created the national debt system and our monetary system to create a stable economy so that businesses could grow. The government was involved in the economy. And Hamilton even got Washington to pass legislation, or got Congress to pass legislation which would subsidize certain industries and businesses in the United States and benefit them so they could grow. We've never had this opportunity, this time period in American history in which we had pure laissez-faire economics, which there's no government regulation. So, on the one hand, I'm blaming Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged, for the current destruction of the United States of America. And on the other hand, I'm pointing out that her philosophy has also been cynically used and co-opted by these same forces to provide an intellectual justification for what they're doing. But that puts a lot of stress on all the other things and all the other ideas that come up. So this really began, the United States really began adopting and putting in place some of these ideas that came from Rand and objectivism during the 1980s. With the election of Ronald Reagan, we literally changed course in terms of how we saw the government's relationship to the economy and how we saw the government's relationship to the people. Reagan famously said, the government is essentially the problem. That it's not the government's job to solve problems, the government is the problem. And the idea being that if government just got out of everybody's way, that everything would be fine. Notice how that echoes what Rand is saying, that if we got rid of regulation, we got rid of taxation, then everything would be fine, that society would run on its own. You may also recognize kind of libertarian ideas in there. And certain, as I said earlier, libertarians and Rand have some things in common, not everything in common. But it's not really just Reagan. It's other political officials who came to power in the 1980s, like Alan Greenspan, who ran the Federal Reserve System. Alan Greenspan was literally in Ayn Rand's inner circle. He was one of her acolytes. He was one of the people who finally convinced her when she was dying of cancer to apply for Medicare and Social Security because she was penniless and dying of cancer. That's kind of ironic, given her philosophy, that she went on government assistance at the end of her life. But Greenspan convinced her to do that, and he absorbed those ideas. So, a lot of our Fed ideas in the 1980s that meshed perfectly with Reagan's political ideas, political economic ideas in the 1980s, became more powerful because, Rand literally had someone who had been, literally sitting at her feet, listening to her espouse of philosophy, in charge of the United States, economy through its banking system. So, that's kind of a big deal. And notice in the 1980s that something really happened. Something changed in our society, where we went from, the 1960s, peace, love, all this kind of thing, acceptance, passage of the civil rights legislation we see in the early 70s, even Nixon passing environmental regulations and things like that. And all of a sudden in the 1980s, we get this kind of abrupt change. And we get a government which is now on the side of business. We get a government which is talking about big business and industry as though they are the most important part of our economy. I know what you may think. That you may think it's always been true, particularly if you haven't studied history or you weren't alive before the 1980s or politically aware before the 1980s. But it used to be true that industrialists in the United States of America recognized that the country and they were all better off if industry, at least paid attention to, gave lip service to, made concessions to workers and to the government so that society as a whole would be better. Notice between 1940, let's say between 1950 and 1980, we expanded public schools, we expanded public universities, we, like I said, at least legislatively attempted to address issues of discrimination, civil rights. We put in place programs to help the poor. We created Medicaid, we created Medicare, we created the Great Society under Johnson, and all these things were created during this time period, and they couldn't have happened without some support, without at least the cooperation of big business in the United States. It's true that in the United States, there used to be a time where, the top earners, when they reached certain tax brackets, were paying 72% plus of their income. And they were still rich, and they were still incredibly comfortable, and they still created jobs. But Reagan, kind of espousing this Ayn Rand philosophy, by the way, Reagan had read Ayn Rand, and he liked her ideas. Reagan espousing this Ayn Rand philosophy basically said, this is backwards. What we need to do is to make things easier for business and industry and wealthy people because they're the job creators. They create jobs. That's what they do. And the only responsibility that a business has is to its stockholders. That we go from industry and businesses thinking they had a responsibility to society, to the United States of America, to now they only have a responsibility to their stockholders. So, because of that, Reagan ends regulation, which made it more difficult for companies to move manufacturing overseas. And we see the loss of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs moving overseas. Why did corporations like the automobile industry do that? Because it was better for their stockholders. Their profits went up. And as these profits go up, we begin to pay more attention to rich people. All of a sudden, rich people are celebrities. We had a whole show called, Lifestyle of the Rich and Famous, which was on TV, where, an interviewer went into the homes of these wealthy people, and average people sitting around their house watching TV could see, how lavish Trump's lifestyle was, or how lavish of these other wealthy people's lifestyle was, and talk to them, and it kind of made them sound like these great people. Our television was dominated by series like Falcon Crest and Dallas, which were, TV dramas about rich people. And yes, they were, oftentimes despicable rich people, but they had really nice clothes and they drove really nice cars. And so in the 80s, we begin to admire the idea, or we begin to admire the rich in a way which we really had not in the 1980s and the 1970s. And we begin to look at industrialists, men like Jack Welch and Lee Iacocca at Chrysler. Jack Welch was at GE, as these kind of heroes, as these kind of industrialist, capitalist heroes who were, making us all richer, even though what was really happening was that the gap between the rich and the poor was growing. We believed in this idea of trickle-down economics, that the United States, everybody would benefit if the wealthy made more money because eventually their wealth would trickle down to the rest of us. That's where they quoted Kennedy saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. Well, the rising tide only lifts all boats if all those boats are in the same pond or in the same lake. And increasing what that gap between rich and poor meant was that we aren't. It's no coincidence, by the way, that Trump became a celebrity during the 1980s. It's no coincidence that an anti-hero like Gordon Gekko became somebody who was admired. But, in the movie Wall Street, Gordon Gekko says, greed is good. That became kind of a thing. When you think about American Psycho, he's kind of satirizing that idea, but notice how many people today still look at American Psycho, particularly, unfortunately, a lot of young men look at American Psycho not as a satire of a morality of a society that had become immoral, but as, kind of people to admire. Now, you might think, well, bookish dude, if this was all true, we would have gotten to the point where America was being destroyed by this philosophy, which, comes from Ayn Rand and kind of a bastardization of her ideas. We'd have gotten to this point already if you were right. Well, the problem with the kind of economics that Reagan practices and the problem with Ayn Rand's philosophy applied to economics is it creates more instability in the economy. And when the economy is unstable, we get recessions. So, it's not a coincidence that we had 12 years of Republican more or less laissez-faire deregulation presidents, Reagan and George H.W. Bush. But then there was a recession in '92, which led to the election of Clinton. Clinton came in, raised taxes on the wealthy, did more things to benefit social spending, etc. And we get this kind of break period where this destruction isn't taking place. Then we get the 2000 election. George H.W. Bush becomes president. The first thing he does is he cuts taxes for the rich. He reduces regulations, and we get this economy which appears to be prosperous, which the gap between rich and poor is growing again, which makes the economy even more stable. And that deregulation led to the housing crisis, which cratered the economy in 2008, 2009. So we elected Barack Obama, who put in place more regulations and did things designed to help the average person and make the economy grow for everybody, and to get some handle on corporations. And then we had him for 8 years. And then, the Democrats nominated Hillary Clinton for president in 2016, and we got Trump. And Trump, the first thing he did as president is he cut taxes, he reduced regulations. Okay, then we got the COVID crisis, which also was a recession. So we elected Democrat Biden, who came in, restored economic balance, and then because eggs were expensive, we elected Trump again. And what's Trump promising to do? He's promising to cut regulations, cut taxes, and cut programs for everyday Americans. Notice how Trump's idea fits perfectly, at least economically, within what Rand's talking about. He wants to eliminate taxes. He's actually talking about eliminating taxes and going back to just tariffs. He wants to eliminate large parts of the United States government which do things for the American people that are of an economic benefit. He wants to get rid of regulations, environmental regulations being at the top of the list. But, even getting rid of DEI initiatives is a part of getting rid of government regulation. And he wants to cut taxes for the wealthiest and for corporations. And it's not a coincidence then that the poster boy of the new Trump administration is Elon Musk, our new billionaire hero. Elon Musk. He's as though he has stepped right from the pages of an Ayn Rand novel. And Elon Musk is aware of this about himself. He's aware that in the society beginning in the 1980s, we begin to worship wealth. We begin to worship the wealthy. We begin to treat the wealthy as though they were better than the rest of us and as though we all depended on them. And so now when we have Elon Musk in a position of power, which he doesn't really have any right to and shouldn't be exercising, more or less given that power by another guy who's really rich, but who was at least legitimately elected. Now we see this kind of cult of Elon Musk working in our government, where people just trust Musk with their most private, information because, he's a rich guy and he's wealthy and he's obviously smart because he made all this money and he wouldn't be doing anything that would hurt the rest of us. Because, Ayn Rand's hero character, John Galt, came back to try to restore order to an overregulated society. And nobody listened, so he left and everything fell apart. I can't tell you how many times I've argued with people who said, if we tax the rich, they'll just move. They'll go somewhere else. They'll shut down their business, their industry. And if in your head you're thinking, well, they might do that, they probably would, then this philosophy has already made its way into your head as well. No matter how you vote, no matter if you have a red hat or not, you've already embraced this idea that our society is dependent on wealthy industrialists. And that comes directly from Ayn Rand. That's where that comes from. Okay, if you're beginning to if you think to yourself, well, how can these Republicans who embrace this kind of Ayn Rand philosophy also be religious? It's because they've used religious people to get power, and this is where Ayn Rand's naivete, where the utopian nature of objectivism falls apart, because people will use the elements of power to gain more power and wealth, and that's where we are. That's where we are, where the wealthy and people like Elon Musk are exercising, outsized power, and they're using their power to do things that are probably going to hurt most of us and benefit them. And in the process, they're destroying the United States Constitution, they're destroying our democracy, they're destroying our faith in our institutions, and I'm not sure we're going to get those things back. Anyway, there you go. There are my thoughts about how Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged, destroyed the United States of America. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.